Good evening. My name is Peter Tarsi, and this is another installment of Legislative Update with Representative Robert DeLeo, Speaker of the House. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing great, Peter. Great to be back.
Yeah, it's been about 2 months since the last show.
A couple of months, I think. Sorry about that. We just got through with the budget. And I'm not just got through, but
on the House side.
That took quite a bit of time.
All righty. I want to start off with a very simple thing. Patriots, Red Sox,
yeah.
And now possibly the Bruins.
Yeah.
What happened to the Celtics?
Oh, the interesting part about the Celtics were, I think, out of, well, at least relative to the Bruins, I think the Celtics were looked upon after the great showing they had last year that they were the ones who probably would at least get into the finals. I don't know if they would have beaten Golden State, but so was the Bruins.
So we'll have 3 of the 4 teams in calendar year 2018-19.
Yeah,
that's something.
That really is, when you think about what a very special place Boston is, New England is, whatever, on relative to our sports team. This is really. I heard something about the last time this happened. I think it was Detroit. They said quite a while back, and we really take it for granted. For so many years, I can remember, for instance, being a big baseball fan too. We never know if we'd ever see the Red Sox win the World Series, and now we have 1 year, and we have 3 of our major teams that are, well, at least 2 have, and maybe a third that will win the championship as well.
Let's get into subject matter.
Let's talk sports.
I'd rather. It's probably more interesting.
Yeah.
Fiscal year 2020. It sounds weird, 2020.
Yeah.
The House side has gone through the budget, their side.
Right. And
I know that you've sent it over to the Senate's now doing theirs, I believe.
Right.
What is in the House side of the budget that could pertain to the communities and also the state that are important to everyone?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, we put in another $200 million into our rainy day fund, which is stabilization fund, which could bring us to, I think, about $2.5 billion. I think that's important because I think it shows good fiscal control, and I think it shows that obviously if there's another economic downturn and in the future, that we'll be prepared, that we can handle that. And plus it helps us relative to our bond rating. So it does save the state, millions of dollars relative to bonding. In addition to that, in terms of Winthrop in Revere in particular, we have money in there for the CAPIC program, which serves people in both Winthrop and in Revere.
What is CAPIC, first of all?
Huh?
What is CAPIC, so people will understand what that is?
Yeah, CAPIC can be anything from helping people with housing to helping people with fuel assistance and, the homelessness and, anything of that sort.
Is that Community Action Program Intercity?
Right.
How do you like that? I even remember it.
Very, very good. We've had a great relationship in terms of sometimes getting the number of calls that we receive from people in need. We've had very good results with trying to get people help at a time when they may need it. In addition to that, both cities will again be receiving money. Again, this depends obviously what happens.
Well, this is on the House side.
The Senate, and then on to the governor, obviously, for child safety grants in both communities as well. We have money in there for the Chamber of Commerce, commerces in both communities to give us the ability to better serve the chambers in the sense that they were able to sell Revere or Winthrop in terms of business or coming to Winthrop to live or whatever it may be. In addition to that, there's money in there from the Sullivan Playground in Revere that was spearheaded by Representative Vincent. We put money in there for transportation study in Winthrop as well. The head of the transportation Town Transportation Committee, Julia Wallace and others had come in. Chris Aiello, I think, was another, and there was another gentleman, I can't off the top of my head remember who it was, but talked to me about the, the need, not just necessarily about traffic, but the need in terms of whether it's bus stops or any type of transportation issues that we can take a look at and do a study in terms of see what Winthrop may need there. So those are just a couple of, let me not forget in terms of money for beach maintenance and beach patrols by the state police in both Winthrop and Revere as well.
Well, wasn't there a year that a governor did not want that to go into the budget? He vetoed it out, or he withdrew it from the budget?
Yes, I can't remember. This is embarrassing. I can't remember who.
I think it was Patrick.
I want to say it might have been, only because if I wasn't speaker, I was probably chair of Ways and Means at the time, but obviously we overrode that veto.
Because Revere Beach.
But I think that this, generally, I think what Patrick's issue was that he wanted it to come out of the state police budget as a whole, probably. I don't think he was objecting to patrols on those beaches, but I think he just wanted to see a different mechanism, so to speak. I don't think Governor Baker has ever had any difficulties with it, and I can tell you, I sometimes get calls and things that are going on in Winthrop Beach. Probably, obviously, not as severe, we'll say, as Revere Beach. Not that they have a great amount of problems, but obviously a beach of that size and with the number of restaurants and
plus they also have
bars
bars,
and other things that are there, may attract a little more trouble. But I think last year, I think it was pretty good on both fronts in terms of any instances of any difficulties.
Now, on the Senate side, do you foresee any difference from their version of the budget to yours?
I think what I've seen so far, obviously there's going to be differences, whether it's the governor, the Senate, and the House. There are going to be differences in priorities and whatnot. But I think in terms of most of the major priorities, I think we're pretty much in sync. It seems to be, this year. Now, having said that, obviously the Senate has not done their budget yet. Maybe by the time this is actually aired, they would have completed it. And we know through the amendment process things do change. But I think that this year, anyways, I think that the things I think are fairly close. I think not only in terms of the budget, but I think in terms of legislation as well. For instance, I mentioned the stabilization fund. I think we're all in agreement that we ought to make sure that we increase that. We're also going to be taking a look at the, housing, affordable housing. It probably is a separate piece of legislation. We obviously, again, put an emphasis on drug abuse and homelessness, for instance, which is generally something that we would all agree to. Transportation, I think, is going to be a major issue that we're going to be discussing in the funding of transportation. I'm talking about for the whole state, not just the MBTA. So I think some of those items, healthcare, containing the cost of healthcare, we have a plan relative to trying to bring a better control relative to prescription drugs, for instance. I think the Senate probably will have a different version of it, so that's something that will go to conference, but with the same basic concept of trying to make sure that, the complaints or the issues that we've heard relative to drug pricing that are out there, that we try to be of help to the consumer while at the same time not trying to hurt some of the drug companies who have their businesses right here in Boston, are a big part of our economy.
I watched C-SPAN, and they've had hearings regarding drug companies and the profits that they make. One thing I will not understand is if you get, let's hypothetically just say an aspirin, all right? Not that aspirin is the one we're talking about, hypothetical. If you buy it in Canada, if you buy it in England, it's cheaper dollar for dollar than it is in the U.S. That, for the life of me, I don't understand.
Yeah, yeah, and I will say that that's, I think, where probably, I won't say take a page out of Canada, but I think the issue, because of what's happened in Canada in terms of some people looking to Canada for drugs, there are those who say that's not the best way to purchase drugs, and I will tell you that there are two things to remember. First of all, in some of the amazing drugs that we have, that we would never think that we would have a drug that would be able to solve some of the diseases that we have. And to the credit, in some cases, billions and billions of dollars have been spent for study and research and whatnot. So obviously those drugs are going to be more expensive. On the other hand, we've had the situation where some vaccines, which are fairly common, for instance, where some companies have seen I was going to say the need, but have driven those costs up, sometimes double or triple the cost, where there's no reason for them to do so.
Right.
So it's finding that balance, I guess you'd say, between the two that I think hopefully we're going to come and try to control.
Now, the Senate, like you say, they're, as we speak, or within the next day to whatever, will have their version of the budget that they'll discuss.
Well,
and they'll change wherever.
As we speak, they start tomorrow to debate it.
Now, I know the process is once the House okays their version of the budget, the Senate okays, it goes to shall we say, a mediation process. When do you foresee that happening?
Well, what happens is that we do our budget. Well, the governor does his budget. We do our budget. The Senate does their budget. And then what happens is we have what they call a conference committee, which is made up of 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate. Because of the numbers of more Democrats in both the House and the Senate, it's 2 Democrats and 1 Republican in both the House and the Senate. And they start what they call, conference, which will begin probably sometime early, very early in June. And then, by 3 weeks to a month, by July 1st, hopefully we'll come to a conclusion of a budget that we can send on to the governor. And then the governor at that point has 10 days in which he can line item veto certain aspects that he doesn't like. He can send back with an amendment. I like the idea, but I might want to change it here, or leave it alone.
Or increase funds or whatever.
Yeah, and you know that a governor is, he's going to make some changes as well. So I think that when people talk about some of the difficult issues that we face, and some of the ones I just mentioned, they are difficult, but probably I think the granddaddy of them all is probably the getting through the budget process in terms of the time and the effort, because this really sets the pace in terms of, the next year, especially in terms of we want to make sure, obviously, that we take care of the most vulnerable residents. We also want to make sure that we make proper investments in terms of economic growth, for instance, and we want to make sure that we're fiscally responsible and prudent. So that should we hit that day where we're finding ourselves in a difficult position where the economy may not be as good, that we'll be prepared for that. And that's what the rainy day stabilization fund comes into handy.
It's amazing. This is a Democratic state. And the reason you can say...
Well, it's a Democratic state, but I only served with 1 Democratic governor.
No, that's the point I was going to bring up. It's a Democratic state. You can see it in the House and the Senate that it's majority Democrat, but yet you have a Republican governor for many, many years. And
in all my years, I only worked with 1 Democratic governor, and that was Deval Patrick. Otherwise, it's been
Republicans?
Weld, Cellucci, Swift, Romney, and now Baker.
There was King.
Well, that was before
I know,
my
but
time.
King was Republican, I think.
No, King was a Democrat.
Democrat, okay.
But I think he switched to being a Republican later.
But the point I was going to bring up, it's amazing, and this state has been, shall we say, praised for how a Republican governor works with a Democratic House and Senate like it's his party.
Well, it's a great point. That's a great point you make. 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to speak with a group called the State Leadership Foundation, wherein they had their convention here or their meeting, I should say, here in Massachusetts. And they asked me if I would come and speak to a couple things. First of all, to welcome them to Massachusetts. And it's funny you should mention the teams, because that was my first the first thing that I had mentioned. At that point, the Celtics were still in it, and I talked about our 2 championships, and we may have 2 more. And then they asked me just to speak upon, how is it that we're able to get things done. Then in other states, and unfortunately right now we see it in Washington as well.
That's another story, Washington.
Right. People are divided along party lines. And I was talking to a group of people who both were Democrats and Republicans. And quite frankly, I think that they were impressed, and they liked to hear how we were able to get things done. And for us, I think it's, I think for most part, I think it's personalities, number one. I think out of the Senate President, the Governor, and myself, I don't think any of our egos are so big that we put ourselves above the interest of the state, that we want to see things get done. We want to move forward. We want to just be out there yelling and screaming at each other. I think at the end of the day, we want to see things get accomplished and move the state forward. And at the National Conference of State Legislators, again, which was another place where myself, the Senate President, and Governor spoke 2 years ago, that was the most well-attended seminar that they had for the whole week, was talking about bipartisanship and getting things done and how we were able to do that. We had over 2,000 people. 2,000 people from around the country showed up and wanted to listen to how we were able to get things accomplished. Do we disagree? Oh yeah, we sure do disagree.
But in a civil manner.
But at the end of the day, we'll say, okay, these are the 10 things that we may disagree on. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it, in terms of how we can come to some type of a conclusion. What is the interest of your branch in the House or the Senate? What do your members feel about this? Okay, all right, that's important. Now let's hear from you. And that's pretty much the way I try to be a Speaker of the House, in terms of, and sometimes just with Democrats, we have liberals, you have conservatives, you have moderates, and the same with the Republican Party. I try to get everybody into the office and let's talk about what are the major issues that they have. And sometimes you'll find that some of the major differences aren't as major as you may think at first blush. So, so far it's worked.
You were at an event Sunday, May 19th, at the JFK Library. The Speaker of the U.S. House, Nancy Pelosi, was there.
Right.
And she was given an award, the Kennedy Award.
Yes.
What was your take on it?
Profile and Courage Award. I have to tell you, the members of the press had when I came into the JFK Library, had stopped me and asked me, what was my feeling about the event. And first of all, I was happy to go, obviously, as a Massachusetts Speaker of the House. And the funny part about Speaker Pelosi was the fact I had met her some years ago when I just became Speaker. I was with then Congressman Markey, now Senator Markey. And it was we just bumped into her just walking in the hall. And he said, Madam Speaker, I'd like you to meet the Speaker from the House in Massachusetts is, Bob DeLeo. And she said, Bob DeLeo? She says, another Italian-American? And she said, well, that deserves a hug. She said, since there's 2 of us, and we started to trade stories a little bit in terms of what it's like to be Speaker and the difficulties and the fun parts and everything in between with the job. And she was a very, very, very gracious and nice lady. And I have to say that beyond that, and talking to some of the other Congress people who were there last night, not only from Massachusetts but throughout the country, who I spoke to, were telling me, that as Speaker of the House, sometimes she's got to be tough on certain things, and in terms of trying to get votes, in other words, to get things done. And I think right now in this country, with what's going on in Washington, I think that she plays a very, very important part. I think that was the reason for her, obviously, to get the award. I think one of the major reasons was her support of the health care legislation, which we had passed here in Massachusetts, which I had the honor of speaking to then President Obama about in terms of what we had done in Massachusetts and what they might be able to replicate in Washington, which they did. So it was a very, very interesting night. I got a chance to meet a lot of great people.
One law has been passed within the last, give or take, week or so, is the hands-free driving. Very important because, let's face it, it's very difficult to do two things at once. Sometimes it's very difficult just to drive, considering what's in front of you. Exactly what does it entail?
Just that. Before we passed that you couldn't text and drive, but the police, had told us that it was very difficult to enforce because of the fact some people may be on the phone, and it was very difficult to know sometimes whether they were dialing a number, or whether they were texting, or what they were doing. And above and beyond that, and most importantly, was the public safety aspect of it, obviously, as well. I had the opportunity to meet with, I want to say there were, each of them were three fathers, I think, who came in that particular day, who lost their children as a result of a vehicle driven by someone who was texting at the time had run over or had an accident with their particular children. And it was very, very moving to hear their stories and to hear their thank yous, and to hear them say to me that, Mr. Speaker, you in the House just today passed a bill that's going to save lives. You should feel very, very good about that. And I think we felt that it was time that we take this action. It appears to be a situation which was not improving at all, that it was getting worse. But there was a second aspect of the bill as well, which a lot of people had an issue with, and that was the issue of racial profiling. There were members and a lot of folks around the state who feel that, this could be, the police would look at it as just another means to make a traffic stop based upon someone's race. So what we added to the legislation was there would be statistics that would be kept for people who were stopped. And then after about a year or so, we'll take a look at those statistics and see if there were any particular regions or zones in the state where we saw that there may have been an issue of racial profiling. So I think it was an issue of public safety, most importantly, and also the issue of racial profiling. And with that, we provided some $300,000 for data collection so that we could take a look at that.
Now, that doesn't mean that a person cannot use Bluetooth.
No, I apologize for that.
So people understand you can talk on the phone, but not have a phone in your hand.
Right, exactly.
So that means
it doesn't prevent you from
dashboard mounting it?
Well, in people said about GPS and stuff, that doesn't affect that at all either. But the Bluetooth and I'm not sure if there are other devices, hands-free devices that you can use. Now, also, you can use a phone, obviously, if you're not driving. So a passenger can. They're not going to have a problem to text or to call or whatever.
Now, in the seatbelt law, it basically said that an officer could not stop you if you didn't wear a seatbelt and fine you. But the only way it could be if he stopped you for another offense and you weren't wearing a seatbelt. Then he could.
Secondary enforcement.
Right. Now, this is automatic?
Yes, this is primary enforcement.
So an officer sees you on the phone, he can stop you right there and say, here's your ticket.
Yes, the ticket would be from $100 for the first offense, $250 for the second, $500 for the third and above. Now, in addition to that, what we had in our bill was to begin the process on January 1st so that we could get the word out in terms of what you can and can't do, educate the driver, to make sure that they understand. whether it be through the news media or whatnot, to make sure that everyone has the proper knowledge of what it is they can and can't do.
All right, now, I know we only have a few minutes,
Oh.
but my concern is just this. How does the state stand as for dollars collected versus what was projected? Are we on a plus or a minus side?
We're on a plus. Very interesting. For 3 months, we were sort of on a downward, not a downward spiral, but not as promising. And then April came along and we just shot right up. So what does that tell you in terms of putting a budget together? Does that mean that you can go out and you go into a spending frenzy because you had a great April? Probably not. It's just like, whether it's that or if you had a good month, you got extra overtime working or whatnot, whatever it may be, you still have to be cautious. And I think that's similar to what we're watching. You like to see patterns, more or less. Patterns in the sense of you want to see, over a period of time that increase over a period of time, or to make sure. But right now we're above benchmark. For part of the year we're a little bit below benchmark, but right now we're above benchmark.
In June, the second of the 2 casinos will come online. What's your opinion of that? Do you think that it's going to be a positive? Well, I shouldn't say it that way because you were in favor of putting casinos into Massachusetts anyways.
Right, and so far, I think for this fiscal year, it has meant in excess of close to $250 million, $238 million, something like that.
From Springfield and Plainville?
Right, and for the whole time that we've had the law, I think it's been $384 million, plus or minus, something like that. So it has been. The importance that I saw was a couple of things. Obviously, the first thing that I saw was the importance of jobs. In the Encore facility, and you're talking about 5,000 new jobs. Although MGM may not be as great as that in terms of the numbers, it's still important. In Plainridge, I will tell you, it has meant jobs as well. But in addition to that, it has also meant money into the coffers of the Commonwealth. And when you look at alternatives to raise income, I think it's important. I don't know if many folks, there are some times when, additional taxes or higher taxes may be necessary. But I look at it as putting more people back to work, and with that, you're bringing in more into the tax coffers of the state. But most importantly, again, you're putting people back to work.
Bob, we have a little better than a minute.
Oh, okay.
All right,
okay.
so why don't you do your spiel, shall we say?
Boys, this seemed to go fast
I know, listen.
In any case, as I've stated before, if anyone, should have any issues, any questions, whether it's a statewide issue or personal nature, please feel free to give my office a call at 617-722-2500, 617-722-2500. And as we are approaching Memorial Day,
Yes.
I just want to, again, say thank you. A very simple thank you, a most important thank you that we all owe to the veterans who have served our country, and especially those who, to their families, of those who have given the ultimate sacrifice to their country.
And for the ones that are in the service now.
Right, right.
Bob, thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Thank you for viewing. We'll see you next time.